Okay, welcome back. Today we're beginning our second week of classes already. Hopefully by now you're starting to get into a routine of classes and videos for internet classes and all that kind of stuff, and getting things settled down and getting rolling on this semester. By the time you guys are watching this, I'll be down in South America again, and I'll be popping back my answers to your post and everything on the internet, sitting beside the jungle listening to the howler monkeys and maybe picking a banana off the plant right in front of me, something like that. But at this time, I'm still up here in the North Country, snowing outside today and all that, so that's one of the conditions that, as a missionary, you face physically. One day you may be in the cold north, the next day in the hot, tropical, humid, tropical lowlands. So that's just part of life. And that's kind of a good introduction or starting point, actually, for what I want to talk about today, and that is physical well-being. Now, we've talked about emotional and or spiritual and all that yesterday a little bit, and certainly that borders on the emotional as well. But today I want to focus on the purely physical. Now, this may not be as much as what you might think, or it may not be as much as what I might think. If you're going to one of the large cities in one of the developed countries, which is certainly a possibility, they need missionary work as well. They need somebody to share the gospel with them. You'll probably have conditions very similar to what you live like in America. And so it's not that big of a deal. Even then, though, just the fact that you're going to be exposed to different bacteria in the water and the foods and everything like that, you'll probably have at least a little bit of trouble. Most people generally do. That's where those famous jokes about Turista and Montezuma's Revenge and all that kind of stuff come from. They don't just invent those things out of nothing. A lot of times they have a foundation in real life. And so as a result, wherever you go, you'll probably find you have at least a little bit of a problem. But I'm going to focus my class today more specifically on those of you who may be called to a place in the world where the conditions are not all that good, where we might use words like primitive or something like that in describing them. And the reason I do that, because if we know how to take care of ourselves in situations like that, we can take care of ourselves anywhere in the world. And if we can be healthy in some rather difficult conditions, we can be healthy just about anywhere in the world. And that's important. Now, what I'm talking about here, a lot of it comes from my wife. We moved out in the jungle, a young couple. We had a small baby. Many people said, man, don't go out there. You know, that little girl that you have is going to die from the rough climate and the difficult conditions and all that. And we certainly knew that was a risk, and we obviously didn't want that to happen. So my wife, being the very careful, very methodical, the very carefully clean person that she was, said, well, I'll just make sure that doesn't happen. I'll make sure that we do things in such a way that everything will be okay. And so as we moved out into the jungle, she began to become very methodical and careful in cleanliness in every aspect. We didn't really have refrigeration to speak. After we'd been there for a while, we did manage to get a kerosene refrigerator. Now, kerosene refrigerators aren't anything like these ones you plug in and boom, they cool everything down. They cool, but very slowly and not very well. And so they're better than nothing, but you can't count on them the way you could count on an electric refrigerator to keep food safe. And so my wife basically prepared every meal every day as we were getting ready to eat it. And very rarely did she keep anything over. She planned precisely the portions and everything. She cooked the amount that we would need. We would eat it. And then she made an effort to have nothing left over, knowing that the risk of even from morning to evening or something like that was fairly significant. She was very careful too in keeping everything clean, washing, keeping the kitchen clean. We installed screens to keep the flies at bay, things of that nature. And in all of that, we lived in Colombia. Our children grew up in Colombia. We were there all of our entire lives, really. And we're one of the few missionary families that I know that none of us ever had hepatitis or typhoid or any of those diseases. And that's primarily due to the fact that my wife was so extremely careful in the house and in the kitchen. And in doing that, she was able to protect her whole family. Me, our daughter, later our other daughters, our other daughter and our son, our other children. And we were able to have a good, and as far as the home is concerned, a very healthy life down there. But it wasn't easy. It took a lot of work and it took a lot of effort. She would heat her dishwater, boil it on the stove, and then mix it with some cool water so that she could have hot, soapy water to wash the dishes in. She was very careful to cook things thoroughly, make sure they were very well cooked. And in that way, any bacteria or anything that was in the food as she bought it, she would prepare it that way. Any food that we're going to eat raw, like carrots or maybe a salad or something like that, she would soak it in iodine water for an hour or two to make sure that she'd killed anything on it and that we were able to eat it that way without any difficulty. And so those are simple, basic, practical things that can be done in the kitchen. Now, most of you girls, if you've had training in cooking and in the kitchen and everything from your mothers, a lot of that stuff is just standard and you'll already know it. So it doesn't require you to learn a whole bunch of new stuff. It just requires that you be extra careful and that you not push the limits or take maybe a few risks or things that you might do up here quite all right with no difficulty, no problems, no risk. In a place like Colombia, in the tropical hot lowlands, things can go south very quickly. And food that is perfectly fine now, if it's not very carefully cared for or very carefully prepared, can become dangerous in a very, very short period of time. So those are the types of things you have to be careful about in the kitchen. Now, for our children, we were always very careful to boil all of our water that we drank. We boiled it and we filtered it. Now, as they got older, we had a very good filter, Katahdin. They still make them. Berkey's another brand that they make. We would use those and still use those to this day. And for adults, those are fine. But with kids, we took the extra measure, filtering the water and then also boiling it. We didn't want to take any chances with our children. And that worked out quite well that way. When it came to milk, we just simply used powdered milk because any of the milk that you would get was not refrigerated quickly. The cows weren't kept all that clean as they milked them. And so it tended to be a little bit spoiled as soon as you got it. And rather than take that risk with them, with the children, we just chose to use powdered milk. They got used to drinking powdered milk, and that was normal for them. In fact, we came up to the States once, and they had actual fresh milk. And my kid says, "Ooh, what's wrong with this milk? It tastes funny." If you've ever had powdered milk, you probably say, "Ooh, powdered milk tastes funny." But my kids thought it was just the opposite. And we were careful that way for a couple reasons. Number one, we knew it was not pasteurized, and even though we had taken a pasteurizer with us, and we tried pasteurizing it, it was very difficult to get it pure. And so if you boiled it, then it had that scorched taste and wasn't very good. So that's the reason we opted to just go with powdered milk. Now, very early in the time I was down there, I actually got undulate fever once, which is a type of illness or disease that you get from drinking milk from cows that were sick and where the milk had not been pasteurized. I was out in the country. Somebody gave me some milk to drink. I drank it. I had always had a policy or a plan that I went wherever I went and I ate whatever was set before me. I think that's important if you're going to be a missionary and work with people. And so whatever I was given, I would eat. That meant that out in the countryside, I wasn't having that same careful preparation and care that my wife provided at home. As a result, I was sick an awful lot, probably most of the time. My first 2 or 3 years in Colombia. In fact, when we came home on our first furlough, I was so skinny. I'm not that fat now, but I was so skinny and so gaunt. People looked at me, and this one lady says, "Wow, what happened to you? You look like those pictures of people from the concentration camps in World War II." And I did. I actually weighed less than I had weighed when I was like 16 when I got my driver's license. I was that skinny. That came from physical exertion in part, but it also came from the fact that I was eating this food that was not very well cared for, not very clean. And as a result, I had dysentery most of the time those first few years. I would come in from the countryside. I would be terribly sick. I'd take a few days. I'd get over it. As soon as I was over it, I'd head back out into the countryside and start preaching and teaching and traveling again, sharing the gospel with whoever I could find. And very quickly, I would come down sick again. I would simply deal with it and put up with it. And as I walked and as I traveled through the jungle, I'd come back in. I'd take a few days to get over it. And that was the way I lived for those first few years. Now, after a few years, the old saying, if it doesn't kill you, it'll make you stronger. Well, there's some truth to that. And so as I would eat this stuff, I was being exposed to a lot of the bacteria and probably salmonella and all those types of things that you get in food that isn't always that carefully prepared and maybe not always that clean, and maybe have been, in fact, most certainly have been left out without refrigeration from lunch to supper, and for that reason is somewhat spoiled. And as I ate that stuff, it made me sick. Now, after a while, my body got used to it, and it didn't kill me. You probably figured that out already. It didn't kill me, and so I got stronger. And so today I can eat that type of food, and it doesn't bother me. In fact, for our 25th wedding anniversary, my wife and I went to Cancun, Mexico, one of those tours they took. We were on this tour group. I don't know how many there were, pretty much a whole plane full from Cleveland up here where we left. And we got out there, and we're all staying in the same hotel, and we're all taking the same buses to go here or there and everything. Boy, after about the second or third day, everybody starts going, oh, I'm sick of my stomach. Oh, I got diarrhea. Oh, I got Montezuma's revenge there, all that kind of stuff. And how bother us? Huh? What are you guys doing? Well, nothing. We're just kind of used to it, I guess. So it is just the way life is. Now, what do you do? Well, there isn't a whole lot you can do. Bible in Mark 16:16 says, you go into the world and preach the gospel, and, eat or drink poisonous things, you'll be all right. And I didn't think that ever meant I was supposed to look for a bottle of poison, drink it just to see if God was going to protect me. But I did think that it applied to situations like that. And so as I was going into the countryside and I was eating this food that we Americans would consider toxic, I believe that had I not been there preaching the gospel, it very well might have killed me, or I simply could not have continued to do it. Yeah, I had to put up with some sickness, quite a bit of it, in fact. And I lost a lot of weight, and it left me pretty weak for a while. But I got over it, and I lived through it, and I became stronger because of it. And so to this day, I continue to work in Colombia. I travel out to the countryside. I eat whatever is set before me. And now I usually have no problems at all. So you will get over it. You'll survive it. And I believe that the Lord will take care of you. So what do? You do the best you can do in the situation that you're living in. You work very carefully to keep flies off of the food as it's being prepared. Work under a mosquito net if you have to, but we chose to put up screens in our house. No Colombian houses had that, but I could buy screening up in Bogota. I made these wooden frame-like things, and I tacked the screen to it, and I put screws up to put them over all the windows. Yeah, it made it hotter in the house, sure did, but yet kept the flies off. And then the cooking and the cleanliness in the kitchen is very important. In fact, we chose not to have a maid. Maids were very common down there. They were very economical. Yet we chose not to have one, not because we couldn't afford one. We probably could have. We chose not to have one just because of the cleanliness issue in the house. And we knew if we hired a maid, she would be doing the way Colombians did it. And that's not to speak ill of the Colombians. It's the way their culture is. That's the way they've grown up. That's the way they've always lived. They change, and they have changed as time has gone on. Today, people are much more careful with water and food preparation. They have refrigerators available and things of that nature. So the culture is changing. It's not nearly as bad or as difficult as it was. But yet, in spite of that, we made it through. And we did, I think, because we were there preaching the gospel. And we trusted the Lord to take care of us, and He did. Now, we did our best ourselves. We tried to be very careful. That certainly helped. I never thought that those verses meant just go and do whatever and be as careless as you want, and you'll be okay. Jesus didn't throw Himself off the temple, the pinnacle of the temple. He said, no, we're not going to tempt the Lord. And I believed we shouldn't tempt the Lord, but at the same time, I did believe we should trust the Lord. I think there's a big difference between those two. And in doing so, then I have been able to live in Colombia very well. I have become very comfortable living down there. I have adapted quite well to the climate, to the situation, to things of that nature, and have gotten to the point where I can be quite comfortable in Colombia, maybe even more so than what I tend to be up here. Now, I got just a couple of other items I want to deal with in this area of health. Food is certainly, food and water are certainly the primary ones. And after we've covered there are just a few other things that you kind of need to deal with. And that is, clothing. When I first got down there, like a typical American, I wore boots and shoes and leather shoes and things like that. Well, we're out in the tropics and it rains every day. I mean, we have 350 to 380 inches of rain in a year. Compare that to, say, Ohio or Kentucky. It has like 28 inches of rain a year. That's 10 times more than the rain we get here. So I learned pretty quickly, wear shoes down there. You get what they used to call jungle rot for the soldiers and, that were over in Vietnam and stuff like that. So I started doing what the Colombians did. I figured if they knew what they had to do to live, what they did would work for me too. And I started wearing just these sandal-like things made out of old car tires and nylon webbing. And it worked great. So I paid attention to the local culture. I was careful to do some things too, like I wore all cotton clothing. I learned pretty quickly. We went down there and a lot of our clothing was polyester cotton, like what we wear up here, wrinkle-free. Down there, they don't worry about the wrinkles. They worry about the heat. And so we switched very quickly to 100% cotton clothing. And in that way, that certainly helped as well. Things like heat stroke and heat exhaustion are a very real risk, especially if you've grown up in the cooler northern climes. And you can do a lot of things to be helpful there. So pay attention to how the local people live and dress, but be careful at the same time that you don't become careless in the basic safety precautions that go with cleanliness and all that around the house. And in doing that, I think you, like we, will probably have a few times when you're sick. Sure, that's part and parcel of the job, I guess. But at the same time, you'll be able to get through it. You will be able to survive. And within a relatively short period of time, you'll get to the point where you are comfortable and you can prosper in that climate, in that culture, and in that situation. And that's kind of the whole focus of this physical well-being part. If you do not get to the point where you can be comfortable and where you can overcome these kind of pesky illnesses that we get, the Montezuma's revenge and things like that, you won't stay very long. You simply won't be able to take it. And so by learning how to adapt and learning how to survive in that culture and in that climate and in those conditions, you will be then able to be successful on your chosen field of work. And I think that's true wherever you go in the world, because it will be different from America. And you cannot reproduce America over there. So you have to become accustomed to living in those conditions, in that culture, and in that climate. Have a good day, and I'll be looking forward to your reports and interacting with you that way. God bless.